All right, let's bring in our panel of Monday parliamentary scribes to talk about this and other issues. Susan Delacourt is a columnist and parliamentary bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Joel-Denis Bellavance is the parliamentary bureau chief for La Presse. And John Ivison is a columnist for the National Post and the parliamentary bureau chief for Postmedia. Good to see you all. We just listened to Jagmeet Singh, and we saw in the by-election in Nanaimo last week concerns being raised by a number of New Democrats, principally Sven Robinson, who's going to be a candidate in the upcoming election, Susan, about there's a lack of coherence on the party's policy on climate change when it comes to fracking and natural gas terminals and so on. Is there a coherence problem here that you see for the NDP?
Yeah, and it was made a little bit easier for him by the fact that Rachel Notley's not around anymore. That was the bigger clash, was between the federal and provincial NDP. But he's not alone in having, provinces are making federal leaders' lives difficult all over the place too. But yes, he does. It doesn't sound like he wants to give a direct answer on that. This is against the context of the NDP versus Greens fight,
who have a very clear policy.
That's right. And in as much as that becomes an election issue in BC, if the lack of clarity could mean that people who want that clarity now have a more substantial option in the Green Party.
JD, what do you think?
Yeah, remember when Mr. Singh became leader of the NDP, he also was sitting on the fence on the pipeline because he wanted to, as I often say to Susan, protect the goat and the cabbage, if I may say.
Yes.
Have his key.
Let's take 10 minutes or so and explain that. No, that's all right. Yeah.
But trying to protect both fronts. But
Yes.
but it means that he is facing criticism from his own ranks now and trying to put a distance between his party and the Green Party is even more difficult now because the NDP lost that by-election in Nanaimo with Ladysmith, and the Green Party has a very clear position on that project in British Columbia. So it may, as Susan pointed out, when you have a government that is in power, sometimes it does hurt the federal cousin, and that's what's happening right now.
John, let's stay with the goat and the cabbage. Because do the Democrats risk having their lunch eaten here?
I'll give you another
by the
touch of
Greens.
metaphor.
Right.
He's going to have iron in his soul because he's been sitting on the fence for so long. It's always a tough one for the New Democrats, though, because, while they've got, I saw in the House today, Jenny Kwan, who I think is an excellent MP, stood up and we're going to have a new Green Deal or a Green New Deal, similar to the US. Whereas the old-style New Democrats, there are many union members who want pipelines. I was at a building trades conference a couple of weeks ago, and that's normally an NDP crowd, and they're a bit disconcerted that their new leader does not appear to be in favour of pipelines or them having jobs, I guess. So it's a tough one, but I think that they're right to pick a target that is more, I guess, tougher to get to, but eat into emissions more than the Liberals. They were outflanked by the Liberal Party in the last election, and clearly they have no intention of being outflanked this time on climate.
Okay, let's switch gears here and talk about Mark Norman. Where does it? Do we have, simply put, I guess we have a couple of things taking place. Mark Norman still says he's got stuff to say, and I'm not sure exactly when he's going to say it. And the push to have parliamentary committees hear from witnesses to get answers to this are there still lots of answers we don't have on this story that we should have?
Definitely. The question is whether Canadian voters are spending a lot of time paying attention to the details. But in the abstract and on the surface level, there are things that will remind them of SNC, including, I have a bigger story to tell. When did we hear that before? It was Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. So I think there are lots of questions, I think, still that need to be answered. I doubt we'll ever get answers to them. It's, what was stopping the government from cooperating with the inquiry? What was in all the evidence that Marie Henein had wanted from the government? And what exactly, that was a masterful performance she did last week. I'm sure it didn't make the Liberals any fond of her, or the government more fond of her, but I do think that she raised a number of things that have given the Conservatives enough ammunition to ask for a lot more from the government. I don't know whether Trudeau's ever going to show up at question period again, though, to answer them. He hasn't been there since.
I mean, how much of this depends on what we, is this the extent of the story? John, let me go to you. Is this the extent of the story? I guess we don't know that with Mark Norman. Or is this going to be here's what else happened and more detail? If he says that, that's a bigger problem.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it does depend on the drip, drip, drip of new details coming out. But even in their absence, I think that, that metaphor that Marie Henein put with the finger on the scales of justice, that resonates with people. Trudeau on this issue has lost the benefit of the doubt, which is immeasurably important to all politicians. People, I don't think, believe him when he says that there was no obstruction of justice or no political interference. In which case, it's possible he may get that back before the election. I think if he goes away for the whole summer and comes back fresh as the campaign starts, people might have forgotten some of this stuff. But just as you point out, in the abstract, which is the most important thing, he's lost the benefit of the doubt.
Joel-Denis, what do you think?
Well, the Tories want to use the same strategy that they used during the SNC-Lavalin affair, which is to bring it to committee levels and try to bring in some witnesses. Now, will depend whether the Liberals accept that, and I doubt they will, but which means that it will be in the court of Vice Admiral Mark Norman to play the next card, I would say, and I expect him to play that card because he said Canadians need to hear other stuff that I know. And as Susan pointed out, it reminds me of the same scenario that was used by Judy Wilson-Raybould. Will it be a drip, drip, drip drama moment on his part? I don't know. I think he will want to spill all of his beans in one shot and making sure that everybody understands.
But it won't be at a parliamentary committee.
No,
I mean, they have learned their lesson. You would have thought that there's no chance that they're going to provide that forum for a credible witness to come along. After which, as happened with Judy Wilson-Raybould, after what she said at committee, the Liberals were done. It didn't really matter what they said because people believed this credible witness. Now, I don't think they're going to, and clearly Norman's very credible, I don't think they're going to give him the same chance.
And then there's this, it'll seem to me, it'll seem strange, but certainly possible that you'll have Mark Norman, who's been through whatever he's been through, will go back to work or wants to go back to work, and Jonathan Vance wants to meet with him to talk about a job, and then would he then be at a news conference a couple of days later, take a break from work to go drop a couple of bombs on the government for their actions in his case?
Again, it is like
it starts to feel a bizarro world.
It's uncharted territory. We haven't seen this before. We hadn't seen former justice minister accusing their own government of injustice, and we haven't seen a high-ranking military officer taking shots at the government. So we are into a bit of parallel universe or something.
And it's not the kind of end of session the Liberals were planning to get. I mean, you got the justice system.
And it's not over yet.
It's not over.
There's still 6 more weeks.
You've got the former justice minister who made, a credible plea in front of a committee. Now you've got the number 2 of the military forces who will likely come and say something, so that will not help the Liberals regain their advantages in the polls. And so it's for them, and while at the same time the economy is doing very well, so they're not sort of benefiting from a good economy at a good times, and that says that
we're hearing more about the cabbage than the goat. Like they should have more, but notwithstanding what role the government played, what about other issues? What's the forum for finding out, answering questions about the role of the Mounties? How come the defense goes and finds new information that ends the ordeal for Mark Norman? A lot of people asking questions. What were the Mounties doing? Why weren't the Mounties talking to the same people that the defense was talking to say, maybe the case isn't as strong as we thought?
And it wasn't that hard to find them. I mean, you're talking about the guy who's there's some campaigning all across Alberta, wasn't it?
Yeah, names a lot of people would know. Peter McKay, Jason Kenney.
Yeah. So this has come up in other things too that I do think it's worth some investigation or look into. Remember Mike Duffy? That all turned out to be for naught as well, right? And I'm old enough to remember the budget leak of 1989, too, when a journalist was charged for leaks. So, again, tough questions have to be asked of the RCMP. I'm not sure who's asking them, as you say, but it is worth asking.
Let's go back to the climate and carbon tax stuff. Ontario rolled out Doug Ford rolled out ads today slamming the federal government, accusing them nickel and diming Ontarians. Doesn't say everything in the ad, doesn't say that Ontarians are getting rebates and so on. But what do you make of that? Using taxpayers' money to do it?
It's more of a
When
partisan
he promised he
attack.
wouldn't. You know?
Yeah, let's remember that Doug Ford has promised to campaign against the Liberals, and he's already started that campaign, I think, a year ago, basically. And he's already at it, and courtesy of the taxpayers' money, he's funding that campaign. And it might backfire because you see polls saying that people are not comfortable seeing a government using taxpaying money to launch an attack ad.
The feds ran radio ads, though, to promote their policy, right?
Right, but I mean, just on the broader question, not many things are going right for the Liberals right now. Doug Ford's going right for them.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I think that he's unpopular, and there are a lot of swing voters who are looking at this. This is just one symptom of why he may not be as popular as he probably should be. I think they're making some silly decisions. I mean, the thing on library books, where or interlibrary transfers, saves about $40 million, and it's caused them a ton of headaches. And all of this adds to the Liberal playbook about do you want to go back to Stephen Harper or do you want to have Doug Ford in Ottawa? They tell me that Doug Ford is playing extremely well for the federal Liberals on the doorsteps.
All right. Susan?
I'm looking at the ad part of this, and I inquired today too. If I was a third party, if I was an interest group in Canada, and launched those ads during an election campaign, I'd be subject to limits under the law. Doug Ford can keep doing this all the way through the election campaign, and no law covers him. Right. So I find that kind of shocking that a provincial government can actively advertise and campaign an election without any rules or limits.
Yeah, and we all thought that Doug Ford was there to balance the budget.
Yeah.
Well, he'll get to that. Very quickly, Newfoundland election coming up Thursday. Newfoundland and Labrador. Polls suggest neck and neck. What are you watching for?
Well, if the province turns to blue, like other provinces have in the past, that means that the federal Liberals will have one less provincial allies, and that complicates things for Justin Trudeau and one time.
John, any?
No deep thoughts, I think, but as he says, I mean, what are you left with then? I mean, there were
eight conservative
there were
premiers.
30 million Canadians who were in provinces that were run by the Liberals in 2015 when Trudeau came in, and then we'll be down to Nova Scotia.
Same thing. It's just I'm looking to see, is this a balancing act or is this a trend?
All right. Thank you all. We'll watch. Take care.
Thank you.